You're listening to The Whole Truth, a Resources Rising Stars podcast.
Has Trek Metals just made a high-grade Greenfields gold discovery in the Kimberley region of Western Australia? That's the question we pose on this episode of the Whole Truth podcast. I'm Paul Armstrong. I've just been talking to Derek Marshall. He's the Chief Executive of Trek, and they've just announced some very high-grade drilling results from the Christmas Creek project in the Kimberley. The obvious question that is asked when people make these announcements is, if this is so good, how come somebody hasn't found it before? Derek gives us a very good explanation as to why this discovery hasn't been made before. It fell out of Newmont. Big companies tend to shed these projects as they move around the world. Greenfields exploration isn't really the domain of the big boys. It ends up in the hands of small companies like Trek, who have a record of making these big discoveries. These results are highly promising. The company does not say yet that it has a big discovery on its hands, but it's certainly got plenty of evidence. As Derek points out, statistically you don't get high-grade results like these without there being some more of it. The simple question is, how much more high-grade gold have they got, and exactly where is it? They've narrowed it down to an area that's still pretty big, so there's an element of needle in a haystack to this, but they're closing in on it. Derek's about to undertake a program of downhole televiewer. That's a technical word for saying we want to know what's down the hole and near it and around it in order to make the next round of drilling more productive, make sure they can get closer to the real thing. So Derek, has Christmas come early at Christmas Creek?
Yes, it appears that way. We're really excited about the results that have just come in from our maiden program at Christmas Creek. And
those results were very high grade, particularly given it was a maiden drilling program. What have you got? I suppose the simple question here is that people looking at those results will say, is this a big Greenfields gold discovery, or is it just a bit of smoke?
So to answer that question, I'll tell you what drew me into the project initially, and before that, Newmont. So Trek picked up this project late last year. It is in the Kimberley region of Western Australia, where two origins, King Leopold and Halls Creek, join, and the structures from the Tanami come through, which is world-class gold district. But where that triple junction is, most of the geology is obscured by sand, by recent sand cover. So it's really underexplored in terms of it hasn't seen the prospecting style of exploration that most of the state has.
That's a very interesting point, because when people say, hey, we could have a big gold discovery out of our hands here, the instinctive reaction from an onlooker is to say, well, you're in Western Australia, mate. If it's that good, why hasn't someone found it before? But in this case, you have a good explanation for that.
Exactly right. So I've always been interested in it, mainly through my brother. So he actually works at Newmont and was part of a big initiative from the Australian government called Uncover, which is, so if you look at Australia, most of the rocks are covered by recent sand or basins. And so nearly all of the major mineral discoveries have come from rocks sticking out of the ground. And so the belief is from the greater industry that the next round of big discoveries are all going to come from undercover, from obscured from site. And so that's what so John, the history to the project is that John Ronsky, who is
legendary geo,
he came up with the idea along with another guy called Greg Down and Keith Patel. And so they formed an alliance, a private company, pegged a number of conceptual targets around Australia, and then this was the one that really stacked up, and I believe it was John who managed to get Newmont involved. They spent 6 years, $6 million exploring. They used their proprietary deep sensing geochemistry. So Newmont as a company has been really focusing in on the technology to explore undercover, and they've got this fine fraction soil geochemistry, and so they rolled that out.
So they've got the IP, the know-how to see through the surface. Yes,
correct. And there's a similar process that has come to light in conjunction with CSIRO and Lab West, where they've got this ultrafine fraction that seems to be taking off, certainly in Australia, and that's quite comparable. So when we got the project, we raced up there and we did an ultrafine orientation survey to see if we could reproduce the anomalies that Newmont did. And it worked really well. We're really happy with ultrafine. And so this year, as well as going and doing the drilling where we got some stunning results, which we'll talk about soon, we also did a big soil program, because a lot of the tenement, it's a large tenement package, a lot of the soil coverage by Newmont was like 2 kilometres by 1 kilometre grid spacing, really wide.
There's another important step in this chain, isn't there? That Newmont, from my reading of it, Newmont, after all this work, obviously, and they drilled some holes, they got some very promising results. Mm-hmm. So why did Newmont come to sell the project?
Why did they walk away?
Yeah.
Correct. So that was my initial question as well when the project came across our desk, and I had a look at it and I was like, this looks pretty interesting.
Yeah. It's not the sort of thing you'd ordinarily turn your back on.
No. So it basically came down to corporate politics. As a global company, the world's largest gold producer, Newmont has a large portfolio that covers, a huge amount of countries across the globe. And they had to prioritize and rank, and that one was always kind of on the back burner, and it just kept delivering results, and they kept, every year after year, they'd keep going back. But then Newmont Australia had pegged a very large tenement package over on the east coast of Australia. And corporate said, look, you guys have this massive tenement package. You've committed to that. It was the new shiny thing. You guys have to pick, where are you going to spend your money and your time? It's opportunity cost. And ultimately, they'd made the decision to go to the new area on the east coast.
Right. So in the long and short of that is that in their global portfolio, as you rightly point out, Derek, they can only back so many horses. They're a big company. They've got to choose things that they believe have got scale.
Yep.
Smaller exploration projects, particularly after the deal with Newcrest. Something had to go, right? Something has to give. The old story, these things fall out of these big companies. Big companies don't have a great track record in exploration, let's face it. The history suggests that smaller companies make the finds, bigger companies develop them and produce them. And there's nothing wrong with that model. A lot of the corporate types and the business, the Harvard types would say to you that a big company shouldn't really be in the business of greenfields exploration. They are better to focus on what they do best, development and production and the like, and leave the greenfield stuff to the likes of Trek.
Yeah, but we're happy that they've done a typical big company job where they've come in and done it really like a thorough job. They came in and they did high res mag. They've done some EM. They've done all this soil coverage. They've
done some of the rather unrewarding, expensive, dirty work.
That's exactly right. So they've really built up this, picture of what's going on under the sand cover there, and handed that to us on a plate. Well, they handed it back to the original vendors, who then on-sold it to us. And funny you should mention, the track record of the majors. So my previous role before Trek, I came from Newcrest, working on the Havieron copper gold discovery out of Telfer. So I was a couple of years up on site there, and I started Greatland Gold, were credited for that discovery. But really, when you rewind and look at the history there, the Telfer exploration team from Newcrest went out, found Havieron, drilled a couple of holes into it, were like, discovered it. And then eventually just ended up walking away. And then it went through some private hands, ended up with Callum Baxter at Greatland. They smashed in a couple of holes like through the roof. Their market capitalization went, into the billions. And then Newcrest came crawling back and had to spend an obscene amount of money to earn 70%. So, who knows if, maybe Trek will be in that position where we define something and then, Newmont will be back.
Lovely problem to have. So back to the ground. So you got hold of this stuff. Newmont had done the dirty work. They'd obviously found that there is mineralisation here, high-grade gold, right? So obviously cuts the odds on finding an economic proposition drastically. So there's some sort of system there. You mentioned the Tanami earlier on, Derek, because obviously an extension of the Tanami geological setting is compelling, isn't it? Because the Tanami hosts some of the biggest gold deposits in Australia.
Correct.
So the idea that the Tanami extends into this ground is one more reason to be bullish about what you've got.
Yeah, to be in the area for sure. And like you said, Newmont had made a couple of bedrock high-grade gold discovery holes underneath one of their soil anomalies. And so we were following up where we got the good results, was following that up. And, we've got a cracker, absolute cracker of results.
So how many holes have you drilled in your own name?
I think we drilled about 70 or so. We just did slimline RC, so we did a quick and dirty essentially across the whole area because it's over 1,000 square kilometres and multiple targets. And I said, well, let's just do some really wide, relatively shallow, like 100, 150 metre space drilling, see if we can jag something amazing. And we got mineralized structures where you've got gold and all these pathfinders at two of the prospects, and then we got this really high grade gold at the Martin prospect. So we got 10 meters at 12.66 grams.
I mean, that's a fantastic intersection.
Yeah, which is fantastic. And then directly below it, same hole, another 10 meters at over 7 grams. There's individual meters in there up to 74 grams, I think, for an individual meter. So it's fantastic grade. And what's got me really excited about it, when you look at Martin, you've got a couple of good intersections that Newmont got, 7 meters at 4.9. That was relatively close to surface. And so everyone was worried, is it some sort of, superficial upgrade, weathering related thing? But now we've really been delving into the detail, looking at they did downhole televiewer because they did RC drilling as well, so percussion. But to get that structural information, they send a probe down the hole. It does optical and acoustic imagery, and you can really pick the structures of which way, the geology and the veins and everything's going. And so we started looking at that, and it looks as though our interpretation so far is that our gold mineralization is sitting in an anticline, which is classic orogenic style. You've got fluids coming up a structure, and then they get trapped by these anticline structures, and so that really, and the orientation of that, and then chasing those really high grade loads is just really exciting proposition for us at Trek.
So what do you know about the dimensions of the mineralisation so far?
Yeah, so far when you look at Martin, there's two clear mineralised trends. You've got one heading to the northeast. That's about 1.5 kilometres long, where the two best intercepts come from. There's another trend heading down towards the southeast, and that's open at this stage. And where that intersects the other trend is where that really high-grade result is. So, we've got quite a bit of scale there. The 7 metres at 4.9 is all the way at the other end of the 1.5 kilometre northern trend.
So you got high-grade gold over a big distance.
Yeah.
Just a question of continuity.
That's right. And so we see lower grade gold continuous through that 1.5 kilometres. So like when you plot it up, there's gold in the drilling all the way through.
When you say lower grade, what sort of grades?
Oh, like 0.15, 0.2, similar to what we're getting at some of the other prospects. So like at Coogan, Newmont did drill lines a kilometre apart, and they got these wide, 15, 20 metre wide zones, a couple of them running at about 0.15, 0.2. And statistically, you just don't get that in isolation. That's clearly a fertile system, and you just got to find the sweet spot. And so we did kilometres and kilometres worth of soils tracing that prospect out, because you got to find a jog.
Is there a correlation between the soil results and the higher grade? Can you draw a line between the two?
No. The soils really just get you into an area. So the soils at Martin are a roughly circular 4 kilometre feature. So it's like this big broad,
somewhere in there there'll be higher grade zones.
That's right. And so the initial drilling, you've got this defining these two trends.
Are you cracking the code, do you think, with the intersection? That's what it comes down to, doesn't it?
Yeah.
What are the controls in this mineralisation, and where the code is, where these structures meet, that's where the high grade is.
Yeah, either where the structures meet or these, I think these anticlines that are going to be, striking and dipping in a particular orientation. And if you can chase those high grade loads, that's what it's all about. So next steps, we've got a downhole televiewer team heading out to the field to do the downhole analysis, structural analysis on our holes, because we're currently, the interp's just looking at the Newmont holes. So we've got that happening to really put together that structural architecture to help us, in the next round of drilling.
Right. Okay, so that's my next question. What is the next round of drilling? What happens next? You've obviously got more than smoke. You've got some fantastic results, albeit in very limited number from limited drilling. The next round of drilling would go a long way to be able to say, do you have a high-grade Greenfields gold discovery on your hands? That's
right, and I want to give Trek and our shareholders the best chance of delivering that success. And I really think we've just got to step through and do sensible science. Do the downhole structural analysis. We've got a number of 4-metre composites from the drilling that came back with anomalous results. We'll submit the single individual metres for analysis. And that'll allow us to do a really comprehensive geochemical and structural, interpretation of that prospect, as well as a couple of the others. We want to do some petrology to really understand the mineralogy of not only the gold mineralization, but any associated alteration and even the host stratigraphy. Because a lot of the time in these orogenic systems, it might not just be the gold, it might be the host rocks. You go into a slightly different style of rock and it might fracture differently, and that might be your host, So it might be we really just want to put the whole picture together so that when we roll out with the rig, we've got the best chance of, Now,
there'll be some seasonal factors in there, won't there? The wet season's just about to kick in. Presumably you can do some of this sort of desktop work and other behind-the-scenes stuff while it rains with a view to hit it as soon as the clouds blow over.
That's exactly right, yeah. I don't think the guys heading up to do the downhole hole are all that excited about it, but we've been doing a bit of a risk assessment this morning, actually thinking, okay, so we're sending these guys out. We were just on the phone to the pastoralist up there saying, look, what's the chances that these guys are going to get reined in, get stuck? Obviously there's some logistics around paying standby, or can they even get out? Do you need to get a helicopter, all this kind of stuff? So, but I feel like it's really important to get out there, get that information so that we can really...
So you've got the downhole data to work on during the crux of the wet season.
Correct.
So that you're really ready to go with some more holes.
Yep.
Derek, sounds fantastic. I know people listening to this might think it's a rather parts a dry geological story, but that's the nature of Greenfields exploration. I suppose the difference here is that while you're trying to work out exactly what the code is here, nothing better than to know you're doing that against a backdrop of high-grade drilling results. It's not like you're doing it to see, is there any mineralisation there? There is, and there's high-grade gold there. As you say, statistically, there has to be more of it. It's just a question of where and how much.
Yeah, and we want to be the ones to find it,
Great. All right, look forward to it. Thanks very much for your time.
All right, thanks, Paul.
You've been listening to The Whole Truth, a Resources Rising Stars podcast, produced by Resource Media, hosted by Paul Armstrong for Reed Corporate. Please note that Reed Corporate does not provide investment advice, and investors should seek personalised advice before making any investment decisions.